Okay, so this is how I'm going to start my live today, right? I'm going to start with this question. This first question, I wrote it down because it just popped up in my mind, and I was like, let me write it down because I don't want to forget this question. So the question is, why? Why are the US sanctions feared and quite effective in countries imposed? I'll repeat the question again is, why are the US sanctions feared and effective in most of the countries imposed? And I just want to add something before we start listening to the videos and watching. Watching the videos and listening to maybe some podcasts if there is time or if needed. But what's happening currently is that those sanctions are quite challenged. They are no longer effective as they used to be. They used to be very effective in the past, but recently there has been quite a change. So there is this video here. So this video, wait, what is this? Ding, ding, ding. There is this video. Okay, so this video, it is from the channel here is called Health. This channel here is called Healthy Aging Talk Deep Dive. So this channel, right, will help us understand how the US sanction functions and why they are effective or why they have been effective in the past in countries imposed, and why these sanctions are currently are like ineffective compared to the past. The US sanctions, they used to be very effective. They are still effective, but um why recently these sanctions, hello. Okay, I will repeat my question again, right? I wrote this question down. My question is, which I'm going to answer it based on the videos that I'm going to watch and the podcast that I'll probably listen to. The question is, why? Why are the US sanctions feared? Why are they feared? And why are they effective? To be honest, is that they have been quite effective in the past. That is a fact. That is true. But currently, these sanctions are becoming weak. And if they do indeed become weak, that would mean the collapse of the US power. But they are not yet weak. They are still effective in other parts of the world, for example, in Cuba. But again, we saw uh, last month, I remember, we saw Russia transporting their oil to Cuba. So you see, this is where these sanctions are challenged. This is where these sanctions are challenged because in the past, Russia wouldn't do that. Russia wouldn't do that, but Russia did that this year. Also, this is the video that we have to watch. China also recently, China just defied 7,000 US sanctions. We know that um, there have been some refineries, Chinese refineries, that were sanctioned by the US. And I think it was as a result of China trading with Iran. So according to the US, is that they don't want any country to trade with Iran, but China trade, like still today, still right now as I am speaking, China continues trading with Iran despite the sanction. And interestingly, China, okay, I think we have to just watch this video. China recently just announced that those refineries that were sanctioned by the US must be ignored, by their government or the companies that owns those refineries. So, but now to understand why the US sanctions are effective or feared globally, we have to watch this video or listen to it. I'm going to watch, you have to listen. I will show you a little bit if necessary.
You're one sentence away from launching your website with Base 44. Since the beginning of the internet, there's never been something.
But here's the thing, right? I just want to be clear. Okay, I will express my personal view later.
With a piece of paper. On May 2nd, China just made a move that could break the entire system. While everyone...
System, right? Oh, wait, I will show you. I don't think I can carry this laptop like this. It's crazy. But you can just listen. You can just listen.
Was watching missiles fly over the Strait of Hormuz.
Wait. You can just listen.
China just made a move that could break the entire system. While everyone was watching missiles fly over the Strait of Hormuz, China made a move that might matter a lot more. Not with a weapon, not with a threat, with a piece of paper. On May 2nd, 2026.
Recent. Pay attention. It was May 2nd. Today is the 17th of May.
Beijing issued a legal order, and in that document was a message to the United States. Your sanctions don't apply here. Not quietly, not behind the scenes, officially, in writing. And for the first time, with consequences. And if that sounds small, it's not. Because the entire global system depends on one thing, that everyone follows the same rules.
This is something that I want people, or I want you guys to understand, like why are the US sanctions feared and very effective? So you need to understand the financial system, how the financial system operates. And this lady is going to educate us about the financial system that actually, I mean, the global financial system, or just financial system. I mean, for most people, between me and you, we just have the credit cards, we go to a bank, we withdraw money, and that's it. But the financial system, it is quite broad. It starts somewhere, it functions somehow. So she's going to explain to us how the financial system works and how the US uses the financial system. Thank you. And how the US uses this financial system, which they control, to, I would say, to manipulate other countries. So she's going to educate us about that.
And China just said no.
Now understand
Because
the
if
financial
global companies
system.
and countries can't follow both systems, which one do they
Thank
choose?
you.
89% of all foreign exchange transactions in the world are conducted in US dollars. Remember this.
Did you hear what she said? This is the turnover by currency and currency pair. The US dollar remained the dominant currency, right? So it was on one side of 89.9% of all trades in April 2025.
Companies and countries can't follow both systems. Which one do they choose? 89% of all foreign exchange transactions in the world are conducted in US dollars. Remember this number. We will come back to it a little later. And before we talk about what China did, you need to understand the machine it's pushing back against. Because most people think sanctions are about politics. They're not. They're about plumbing. Here's what I mean. Let's say India wants to buy oil from Iran. Simple transaction, right? One country sells, another buys. Except it's not simple at all.
And I think this is something that most people always wonder, like, why do you care about the US sanctions? Like, people always ask these questions, right? Like, why are these US sanctions effective? Like, why can't people just bypass them and trade amongst each other without caring about these sanctions? But this is where you will understand why the US sanctions can really destroy like any economy in the world. Take, for example, with Cuba. Okay, she's going to explain. I want to start a little bit back here when she says
in US dollars. Remember this number. We will come back to it a little later.
Okay.
And before we talk about what China did, you need to understand the machine it's pushing back against. Because most people think sanctions are about politics. They're not.
Nope.
They're about plumbing. Here's what I mean. Let's
also,
say India wants to buy oil from Iran. Simple transaction, right? One country sells, another buys. Except it's not simple at all. Because India pays in dollars.
Exactly.
And every dollar transaction on the planet, no matter where it happens, passes through a correspondent bank in the United States. Every single one.
Do you understand why the sanctions matters why the US sanctions can really destroy economies? So the system is quite good, right? But the problem is that over a decade, the US government has been abusing this power that they have with respect to the foreign exchange trades, because we trade in dollars. And like the lady explained, that if you're going to trade in dollar, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that transaction, it is going to pass through the central bank of the United States. So they know. So all the transactions that we make, it doesn't matter. You trade in your currency, but you still have to convert it into the dollars. And then if you convert it, when it gets converted into dollars, it goes through the channels of the US central banks.
That's not a metaphor.
System.
That's how the system is built. Nearly 90% of global currency trades involve the US dollar. Not because countries love America, because the infrastructure demands it.
Exactly.
The clearing systems, the correspondent banking networks, the CHIPS system that processes over $1 trillion a day. All of it runs through New York. And that means the US Treasury.
All countries, they have all used this system to transact globally, to trade globally, all systems. And for the first time in 2026, China defied this system. Those who are following the US war against Iran, they have learned that apparently, I'm not quite sure about that, but it's something that I have seen or watched online. They're saying that China has already started trading in yuan, their own currency. So I'm not sure about that one, but it is something that people are quite talking about.
Specifically, a small office called OFAC has the ability to see, block, or seize virtually any transaction on Earth. Not because of military power, because of financial architecture.
Yes.
To say that I love this job is an understatement.
I've been on the data annotation platform for about a year.
I remember the first time this clicked for me. I was researching how the US
I think people, this is something that I feel like most people, they don't know or they don't understand, why. Because I used to also wonder in the past, countries like Cuba, right? Why can't they bypass the sanctions? But it's not just about the sanctions per se. It's that if they were to trade anyhow, they will still have to trade using the financial infrastructure that is controlled by the US. Because when you trade in dollars, and dollars is the US currency. They control it. They control the movement of the money. They control who is allowed to access this infrastructure, this system. That is the US.
Pressured BNP Paribas, a French bank operating in France, into paying an $8.9 billion fine in 2014.
So apparently there was a French bank that was also sued for contravening maybe the rules to do with those. I don't know. Let's hear what France did to pay this large amount of money.
Their offense? Processing dollar-denominated transactions for Sudan, Iran, and Cuba.
You see? Do you see what's happening? Do you see what's happening? Do you see what's happening? So France decided to trade with Cuba, Iran, and Syria. Is it Syria? Wait, let me study it a little bit here.
currency trades involve the US dollar. Not because countries love America, because the infrastructure demands it. The clearing systems, the correspondent banking networks, the CHIPS system that processes over $1 trillion a day, all of it runs through New York. And that means the US Treasury, specifically a small office called OFAC, has the ability to see, block, or seize virtually any transaction on Earth. Not because of military power, because of financial architecture. I remember the first time this clicked for me. I was researching how the US pressured BNP Paribas, a French bank operating in France, into paying an $8.9 billion fine in 2014.
Why?
Their offense? Processing dollar-denominated transactions for Sudan, Iran, and Cuba. A French bank, following French law, doing business that was legal in France. But because those transactions touched the dollar system, because they traveled through New York for a fraction of a second, the US had jurisdiction. That was the moment I realized this isn't about politics. This is about plumbing. Think of it as a highway system. Every country has its own local roads, but the moment you need to move goods across borders, you have to get on the American interstate. And Washington controls the toll booths. It decides who gets on, who gets off, and who gets pulled over. And the fine for disobedience isn't a ticket. It's being permanently barred from the highway. Between 55 and 60% of all global reserves are still held in dollars. Not because finance ministers in Jakarta or Brasilia are loyal to Washington, because there's no other road that goes where they need to go. At least there wasn't. Now add three more
Now there
layers
is
to
a new
this.
system.
First, SWIFT, the messaging system that connects 11,000 banks in 200 countries. It's based in Belgium. It calls itself neutral. But when the US wanted to punish Iran in 2012, SWIFT disconnected Iranian banks.
Do you understand like how this thing works? Do you understand how the financial system works? It's like when it comes to, it's not even about the military power anymore. It's just about the financial system. If one country controls the financial system of all countries across the globe, that means if this one country, it is not a neutral country, it is a biased country, this country can manipulate other countries that they dislike. And this is something the US has been doing for a decade. It's like if the US government doesn't like you, doesn't like your regime, they can just sanction you. And they know that if they sanction you, it means you cannot trade with any other country. Because whichever country you decide to trade with, whichever transactions you guys try to follow, that transactions will go through the US the US central banks. It's like you just cannot escape it. And other countries, some people may ask like, why other countries like they don't do something? Also, even the other countries who maybe are just traders, they also don't want to get sanctioned because let's say, for example, in this case, right? Let's say, for example, uh, the US sanctions Iran, right? If the US sanctions Iran and my country, which is South Africa, like just say, oh, we don't care, we just want to trade with Iran, the US is going to sanction South Africa. And South Africa also is going to be affected economically. This is why many countries, when other countries are sanctioned, they don't trade with those countries because now that means they will also be affected. It is the same thing with Zimbabwe, my neighboring country. The country got sanctioned. Why? Like Zimbabwe, like they have diamonds. Why haven't they been trading like most of their diamonds and resources for a decade? Because they were sanctioned. They got sanctioned. They cannot. Whichever country trades with Zimbabwe will get sanctioned. And we will talk later about the consequences of sanctions.
When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, SWIFT did it again.
It is SWIFT,
Neutrality,
Europe,
it turns out,
and
has limits.
the USA.
Second, maritime insurance. Over 90% of global shipping tonnage is insured by Western regulated P&I clubs. If your ship doesn't have insurance, it can't dock in most ports. The US figured out it could shut down a country's oil exports without firing a shot, just by pressuring the insurers. Third, and this is the most aggressive tool, secondary sanctions. These don't punish the target country. They punish anyone who does business with the target country.
Yes, this is
If a Turkish bank
this is the one that I was talking about with respect to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was sanctioned, and if any country decides to trade with Zimbabwe, will also get this. Let's see. Okay, so we have different types of sanctions now. Let's learn about them. Let's go back a little bit.
it calls itself neutral. But when the US wanted to punish Iran in 2012, SWIFT disconnected Iranian banks. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, SWIFT did it again. Neutrality, it turns out, has limits. Second, maritime insurance. Over 90% of global shipping tonnage is insured by Western regulated P&I clubs. If your ship doesn't have insurance, it can't dock in most ports. The US figured out it could shut down a country's oil exports without firing a shot, just by pressuring the insurers. Third, and this is the most aggressive tool, secondary sanctions. These don't punish the target country. They punish anyone who does business with the target country.
Yes, secondary.
If a Turkish bank
the
processes
one
a
to do
payment
with
for an
Zimbabwe.
Iranian company, that Turkish bank loses access to the
Exactly. It's the same thing. The US, let's say Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was sanctioned by the European countries. It got sanctioned. So when it gets sanctioned, if South Africa, let's say in the past, tried to bypass those sanctions, South Africa was also going to get disconnected from SWIFT, which is, it could mean the shutting down of South Africa's economy as a whole. But they didn't. Like I said, you can't. But now countries are doing it. Russia did it. Russia is doing it. China is doing it. China and Russia are bypassing the US sanctions. We want to get into that.
US financial system. The choice is binary. Do business with Iran or do business with America. For any global corporation.
It's the same thing that's happening right now, because the USA has been wanting China to buy oil from them. They have been wanting China to buy oil from them. But China buys oil from Iran. But remember, the US sanctioned Iran. Also sanctioned those Chinese refineries, because the US doesn't want China to do business with Iran. They know, like, sanctions are very simple, right? Sanctions are quite simple, but they are very detrimental. Detrimental to the economy, detrimental to the livelihoods of people. So the US, they understand this game, but now they have found their match, which is China. So now we're going to learn how is China destroying this system that has been abused for a decade to manipulate like other countries.
That's not really a choice at all. By May 2026, the SDN list, that's the master list of sanctioned entities, had grown to over 70,000 entries across 190 countries.
Imagine.
70,000.
Imagine.
To put that in perspective, the entire population of a mid-sized American town, say Galesburg, Illinois, could fill that list. Except instead of people, each entry represents a company, a bank, a vessel, or an individual who has been cut off from the global financial system by the decision of a single government.
Imagine.
Look at what this has meant for the countries on the receiving end. Iran, under the tightest oil embargo and SWIFT disconnection, saw its petroleum exports drop by 80% during peak enforcement periods.
Do you see how effective are sanctions? Sanctions are very effective. Very effective.
Russia, hit with capital market restrictions after 2022, had $300 billion in central bank reserves frozen
Frozen.
overnight and
Iran
pivoted
also has
hard
some
toward
funds
yuan-denominated
frozen.
trade. Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA, was sanctioned into near paralysis, contributing to hyperinflation and a production collapse. North Korea exists in total financial quarantine, completely isolated from the legal international economy. And here's the part no one in Washington wanted to talk about. The system only works if everyone agrees to follow it.
Exactly.
The moment a player big enough decides to say no, the entire architecture starts to crack. On April 24th, 2026, the US Treasury sanctioned 5 major Chinese oil refineries. These are what the industry calls teapots, independent refineries, mostly in Shandong province, that process millions of barrels of crude. Their crime, according to Washington, buying Iranian oil.
Do you understand the game of these politicians or the financial system? How it works? It's sanctions, it's politics, it's the financial systems.
Billions of dollars worth. The companies, Hengli Petrochemical, Shandong Jincheng, Hebei Xinhai, Shandong Shouguang Luqing, and Shandong Shengxing, were placed on the SDN list, their assets frozen. Any entity doing business with them anywhere in the world now face the threat of being cut off from the American financial system. In the past, this would have been the end of the story. The companies would have quietly restructured, maybe changed their names, routed transactions through shell companies. The standard playbook: avoid, evade, work around. But this time, something different happened.
So now we are talking about the Chinese oil refineries that have changed or that have weakened the US sanctions. Can you imagine that? Who would have thought that this day would come? And they did so without invading any country, without waging a war, without literally using military force. They did this voluntarily, so just by passing a law in China that the US sanctions are not going to work in our territory. We are going to trade with whoever we want to trade with. If it's about the dollar, then we're not going to trade in dollar because they cannot trade in dollar. It's impossible. They are sanctioned. And what are we going to do now? We are going to trade in yuan, our own currency. So we don't know how this is going to happen because remember, it is still very, very recent. China passed that law, not a law, but it was just a statement that I'm not sure if it's a law or it was a public statement that they passed on the 2nd of May. We don't know yet how this is going to unfold in the future. Because also again, the Strait of Hormuz situation, we don't know how it is going to be like as soon as this war ends. Because I don't know if you just saw in the news, the USS General, that big navy in the US, they just departed from the waters in the Middle East. They are back home. I've seen the video. They are back home already. So I'm not quite sure what does this mean about the blockade, about the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. No one knows yet. We don't know how this war is going to unfold anymore because nobody knows. We don't know because we don't know what the US is planning to do. The US also has a lot of problems going on right now. They have their own Congress trying to actually find out why Trump and his administration waged this war in the Middle East. They are still trying to find out, or they're still doing the investigation of the Minab children, you know, those Iranian children who were killed in the first strike, like the first day of the war. So it's like in the US Congress right now, it's a lot going on. So and whatever that it is going on, also they don't know why this war is happening. They don't know where this war is going. So if the US Congress doesn't know, I mean, I cannot know, nobody can know. Only Trump knows, only Trump's administration know. Even Iran doesn't know because right now we just know that there is a ceasefire going on in the Middle East, but we are not sure when this ceasefire is going to last, when it is going to last. We don't know. We don't know about the Middle East situation right now. It is just a matter of time where I don't know if the war is over. We just know that epic fury is over. Epic freedom is not freedoming. It's not fun. He's not doing anything there. But I don't know. Trump just posted. They call it Truth Social, that there were 78 cargoes that were somehow somehow managed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But we don't know. We don't know because these people, they just post things online. There is nothing on the record, so that's the problem. When things are not on the record, we don't have evidence, we don't have proof, so we don't know. So we can just put it as like a speculation or maybe an opinion or whatever, but it's not factual because there is nothing in writing.
A second.
So remember, now we are going to have two systems, but we don't know yet if China is going to win this fight because we don't know. Like it's difficult, because when you think about the U.S. financial system that operates today and many countries are still using today, it is it's the global foreign exchange company, and we use dollars to trade. It's not something that you can just bypass or topple in a year or in 2 years. It took centuries for that system to get built. That's the reality. The U.S. financial system to become this powerful, it took them years. I think more than 60 years to be where it is today. We don't know if with the situation with China, it will get toppled, or we don't know what's going to happen. But then let's continue learning.
China's Ministry of Commerce, MOFCOM,
Okay.
invoked the anti-foreign sanctions law and
it's
issued
legal.
a formal blocking order.
Oh.
Not a statement, not a diplomatic protest, a binding legal directive. The order stated, in effect, American sanctions
legal.
shall not be recognized, enforced, or complied with on Chinese territory.
Oh.
Let that sink in for a moment.
I thought they just made some sort of like a post. No, actually they enacted the law. They put it in writing. It's legal. It's a law. It's effective. They say, okay, now the U.S. sanctions are not going to be effective on our territory. That is very big. That changes the whole, like, dependent on the U.S. financial system. That means there is a likely. Here's the thing. Let me say this thing, right? I did say before, the U.S. financial system, it took them a decade to build it, meaning that for China also to reach that level, it will take a decade for it to get built. It will take a decade, and also with China, it's not going to be easy, right? Because I think people, you have heard these rumors that BRICS is trying to bring about like their own currency. We don't know about that. We don't know about that. Building a currency is not easy. It is not easy, especially when it comes to a trade currency. It's not easy because remember, also these BRICS countries, including my country, they are also involved with the US in one way or another, right? So it's going to be very, very tricky for them to build this BRICS currency, because that means South Africa, India, Iran, the UAE, because now they're also part of BRICS, or Saudi Arabia. I don't know which country. There are many countries that joined BRICS last year. So this means that these people, they will have to pull away from the US or even Europe. It's not easy. It is, when you think about it, right, we just think, oh, it is easy that this can happen. It's easy that BRICS can create a currency. It is not that easy. It's not easy. I just want you to keep that in mind, because BRICS countries, South Africa, let's say Iran, the UAE, even China itself, they have business going. They have business with the US, with the US. So they have like crucial business that they do with the US, and it's not something that they can just terminate. But we don't know. We don't know again. Let's continue. We don't know about the future of this currency, this war of financial system, because now it is no longer a war of nuclear weapons. It's a war of financial system.
Moment. This isn't evasion, this is defiance. The difference matters. For decades, countries worked around US sanctions the way you'd work around a pothole. Carefully, quietly, pretending you didn't see it. China just looked at the pothole.
True. For example, countries like Cuba, right? The country didn't collapse entirely after the US sanctions. They managed to survive. They only have the power outage issues there. Yes, and the low, I would say, gas. But somehow, even if a country is sanctioned, they do find ways to move around the US sanctions. And I've seen like in Cuba, they just invented like these cars that it's cars like I don't know, it's a car. You can just say it's a car that use solar panels. Can you imagine? Quite interesting.
And said, "That's not a pothole. That's not even a road we recognize." And then it went further. Under the 2026 amendments to the blocking rules, any company operating in China that voluntarily complies with US sanctions, say a branch of a European bank that freezes accounts of one of those 5 refineries, is now breaking Chinese law. The sanctioned companies can sue that bank in Chinese courts. The Chinese government can seize that bank's assets. Think about what this means for a multinational. If you comply with US sanctions, you violate Chinese law. If you comply with Chinese
Wait,
law,
what did they say?
you violate US sanctions. This is defiance. The difference matters. For decades, countries worked around US sanctions the way you'd work around a pothole. Carefully, quietly, pretending you didn't see it. China just looked at the pothole and said, "That's not a pothole. That's not even a road we recognize." And then it went further. Under the 2026 amendments to the blocking rules,
Oh, so this is the Chinese amendment. You have to listen to this carefully. This is the amendment. And do you know what is interesting about China, right? And I think this is something that many people don't acknowledge. China is very quiet. It's a very quiet country. They don't, they're not loud. That's why you cannot predict China, because they're not loud. They don't tell you what they're going to do. They study people and study the systems. And before you know it, they have their own thing going on. They're very interesting people.
any company operating in China that voluntarily complies with US sanctions, say a branch of a European bank that freezes accounts of one of those 5 refineries, is now breaking Chinese law. The sanctioned companies can sue that bank in Chinese courts. The Chinese government can seize that bank's assets. Think about what this means for a multinational. If you comply with US sanctions, you violate Chinese law.
No.
If you comply with Chinese law, you violate US sanctions. There is no middle ground. You have to choose a system. Let me make this concrete. Imagine you're the compliance officer at HSBC. You have branches in New York, you have branches in Shanghai. Washington says, freeze Hengli Petrochemicals accounts. Beijing says, if you freeze those accounts, Hengli will sue you in Chinese court, and the Chinese government may seize your assets on the mainland. Your legal department in London is on a conference call at 3 a.m, trying to figure out which law to break, because you're going to break one of them.
Exactly.
That's not a hypothetical. That is the operational reality for dozens of global banks right now. And that is the crack. Not a hairline fracture, a structural fault line. I want to be precise here, because this isn't about good guys and bad guys. This is about interests. The United States has a legitimate interest in preventing nuclear proliferation.
Okay, this is quite interesting for me. This thing of nuclear proliferation or whatever they call it, it's for me it just doesn't make sense. And I will tell you why it doesn't make sense to me or why I do not support this whatever legitimate war that or legitimate claims of the US. Actually, I think I will have a separate video where I talk about the double standard of this nuclear proliferation because it doesn't make sense. Why should the US be the only country with nuclear? And one of the main reasons I am against the US having nuclear is because over a decade, we have seen that them having a nuclear, it has some sort given them a leverage to manipulate their financial system and to manipulate other countries. So this is a conversation for another day. Actually, let me just leave it there. Let me just leave
That's why Iranian oil sanctions exist. China has a legitimate interest in energy security. Its economy cannot function without crude imports. Neither side is irrational. But when two rational interests collide inside an architecture designed for only one set of rules, the architecture breaks. You can talk about law and finance all day, but underneath all of it, underneath the legal orders, the SDN list, the blocking statutes, there's a physical reality: oil. By 2025, China had become the buyer of last resort for Iranian crude, not by choice, by default. When the Trump administration reimposed maximum pressure sanctions in 2018, every other major buyer walked away. The European Union, India, South Korea, Japan. All
So basically, China brought, I mean, not China, the US brought this upon themselves. This is why China started like buying oil from Iran. Oh,
SDN list, the blocking statutes.
I didn't know
There's
about
a
that.
physical reality: oil. By 2025, China had become the buyer of last resort for Iranian crude, not by choice, by default. When the Trump administration reimposed maximum pressure sanctions in 2018, every other major buyer walked away. The European Union, India, South Korea, Japan. All of them calculated that access to the American financial system was worth more than discounted Iranian barrels. China made a different calculation. Today, Chinese refineries absorb between 80 and 91% of Iran's total seaborne oil exports. That's roughly 1.3 to 1.4 million barrels per day. And they buy it at a steep discount, $8 to $10 below the Brent benchmark. For Iran, this is survival. For Chinese teapot refineries, it's margin. For Washington, it's a problem that won't go away no matter how many names you add to a list. The logistics of this trade are extraordinary. Hundreds of aging tankers, the so-called shadow fleet, operate completely outside the Western regulatory framework. Their crews switch off AIS transponders to go dark. They conduct ship-to-ship transfers in the middle of the ocean, off the coast of Malaysia, in the Gulf of Oman, rebranding Iranian crude as Malaysian or Indonesian origin. The vessels are registered to chains of shell companies in Palau, the Comoros, Barbados. Flags of convenience stacked like Russian dolls. I want you to appreciate the scale of this. We're not talking about a handful of rogue operators. This is an industrial-grade logistics network that moves over 1 million barrels a day across thousands of miles of ocean, completely invisible to Western tracking systems. The tankers are old, many past their normal.
The system is quite.
We're at 8
complex.
Adventure Base Camp.
Wait, what happened?
I want you to appreciate the scale of this. We're not talking about a handful of rogue operators. This is an industrial-grade logistics network that moves over 1 million barrels a day across thousands of miles of ocean, completely invisible to Western tracking systems. The tankers are old, many past their normal service life, because new ships.
So what this lady told us earlier on is that if you're going to move like your like or trade, if you're going to trade oil, right? there is this European framework that we have to align with, but it seems as though China is bypassing that one also. So China is not only bypassing the US sanctions, China is also bypassing the European, the European oil trade framework, because they have their own legislation there to do with like how these cargoes or how these oil ships they should be transported. It's like there are licenses that you have to get. It's quite it's not complex. I need to be in that legal field to understand how the oil business is regulated. But she did mention it somewhere before as to like how to actually transport oil, like which laws regulate that. So when it comes to oil, it's a European framework. When it comes to the financial system, it's the US framework, US financial framework.
Ships come with new insurance requirements, new inspections, new paper trails.
That is
And
crazy though, right? It's crazy. Like it's very, very crazy. Why should other countries have to follow the European framework when they want to buy oil? Like, how does that even make sense? It doesn't even make sense at all. But somehow, for example, for the ships, because these people they're quite like confusing. They will tell you that the ocean is the international waters, but they themselves have the frameworks in their countries that decide who should use the waterways and who shouldn't use the waterways. But they still say this is international waterways. Complicated.
Aging VLCC registered to a company that exists only as a mailbox in Libreville, crewed by mariners who know exactly when to switch off the transponder and when to switch it back on. That is the physical reality of sanctions evasion at scale, and it has been running for years.
Oh.
Then, in April 2026, the situation went from tense to dangerous. The United States launched Operation Epic Fury, a naval enforcement action designed to physically interdict Iranian oil exports. American warships began stopping and inspecting vessels.
Now I get it, Now I understand. Now I understand why, besides the nuclear weapons, right? Now I understand why the US waged war with Iran. Now it makes sense because what if the US thought by waging war with Iran it would stop somehow, which they did somehow achieve, it will somehow block the transportation of the Iranian oil, which they did. Because and it makes sense now because if you have again watched this war closely, there have been countless time where Trump threatened to obliterate the Iranian, the cargo island where the Iranian refineries are and where they transport, where they make their oil. So now it makes sense. It could be also that the US, they realize that they cannot talk China out of buying the Iranian oil. Hence, they decided to wage this war because it is something that like Trump says it over and over again. He says it a lot that China gets most of its oil from Iran. He says this a lot. So this means that these people they thought by waging a war on Iran, it will trigger China, and China will somehow maybe intervene in this war militarily, so escalate and somehow end up having World War III. But China was very smart in this war. They followed international law channels. They did so. This is just, I'm not saying this is factual, right? It's my speculation. I think, I think the US thought by waging this war against Iran, it will trigger China. China will somehow retaliate because the ships there, which are now blocked, are the Chinese ships. But again, even with the blockade, right? Even with this U.S. blockade, is that Chinese ships are still moving in the Strait of Hormuz. They're still moving freely. So basically, it's like the war didn't escalate the way the U.S. anticipated. So meaning that right now in the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. cannot unilaterally or unreasonably just attack the Chinese tank, and it wouldn't do that because then it will be clear that no, these people have attacked China first. But by attacking Iran, they thought they would attack China and China will retaliate and like things will go crazy in the Middle East. But that's not what happened. Now it makes sense, right? It makes sense.
In and around the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's response was predictable and devastating. It effectively choked the strait, the single most important energy choke point on the planet. 20% of the world's oil consumption passes through that narrow corridor, 20% of global LNG. By late April, more than 40 tankers carrying 69 million barrels of Iranian crude were trapped in the Persian Gulf, unable to leave, unable to
Imagine
deliver.
how many?
69 million barrels just sitting there. Brent crude spiked. It traded between $108 and $115 a barrel through most of the crisis, touching $138 during the worst moments. The price you pay at the pump, that's downstream of this. The cost of shipping goods across the Pacific, downstream of this. The price of fertilizer in Iowa, of electronics in Munich, of bread in
Now, the
Cairo,
Strait of Hormuz is
all
quite
downstream.
important.
This is
Very-
not an abstraction. This is the physics of a global economy that runs on oil being squeezed by two superpowers who can't agree on the rules. And this is where the story takes its most important turn.
Again, right? I feel like I don't know how this Iran war is going to be tried. I don't know if it ever goes to the international court. I don't know how it is going to be tried because it is quite interesting, right? Because remember, this is what's happening in the US right now, right? What's happening in the US right now is that the Congress is still trying to find legitimate reasons for the US strikes against Iran. They do not have legitimate reasons because some people can say no, it's about uh, the nuclear enrichment. It's not even about that because there is no evidence that Iran was enriching its nuclear. There is no evidence. They do not have that evidence. The Congress has been trying to get I think because when you wage a war, apparently, when you wage a war in another country, you must write in you must put it in writing, like the reasons, like legal reasons, like a legal briefing that like allows you to wage a war to another country. So I've seen that in Congress because I do be watching them sometimes. I've seen them. They say we need access to that paper. Give us this paper. Let us see the grounds for this war that you guys waged against Iran. But Access or and his people there, they do not want to give the Congress this apparently briefing that they got from a legal expert as to the reasons why they can legally wage this war against Iran. That is why, as of now, everyone says the war against Iran is illegal because there is no evidence. There is no evidence produced right now. Right now, maybe in the future they will produce evidence as to why the U.S. waged the war against Iran. But right now, as of right now, there is no legitimate evidence or reasons as to why the U.S. decided to attack Iran. There is no legitimate reason. You can just follow the Congress. It is still an ongoing investigation, but the Hegseth and his administration, they do not want to provide. Because remember, it's not about hearsay. It's not about Trump posting on Twitter saying we attack Iran because we don't want the oil, the nuclear enrichment. It must be in paper. There must be evidence that shows that Iran was enriching its nuclear. They do not have that evidence. They don't. Meaning they do not have a legal ground or legal basis to justify this war they waged against. They do not. They do not. If they do, maybe the evidence it is sealed in whatever that document that Hegseth does not want to give to the Congress. I will be waiting for that because I also really need to know if whether there is a legal justification for this war. Because as of now, I will repeat, there is no legal justification for the US to attack Iran. There isn't. There isn't in the US. The US Congress, they do not have that evidence. They don't. The only thing that you guys know is what people post on social media about the nuclear enrichment. That's it. There is no evidence. We do not know that Iran was enriching its nuclear, and which also and honestly speaking, it contradicts with the the international laws, because there are people who follow this nuclear enrichment laws and how they're solved, because I don't quite know how they solve these issues to do with nuclear weapons. But recently, there's never been a report or anything that suggests that Iran was, like, in the past years or recently it has been trying to enrich its nuclear weapon or its nuclear enrichment. Like, there is no evidence that suggests that. You understand? So this again, it is contradictory to what Trump is saying and his administration is saying, because they are saying that Iran was, but the evidence shows that Iran was not. But then again, time will tell. We don't know.
Because the oil crisis isn't just a crisis, it's a catalyst. It's the thing that forced every country sitting on the fence to start asking the question, what happens when the system that runs the world can be turned against you? Here's the thing about sanctions that Washington has never fully reckoned with. Every sanction is an advertisement for an alternative. Every time the US freezes someone's reserves, every other central bank on earth takes notice and asks, could that happen to me? Every time SWIFT disconnects a country, a dozen engineers in Beijing and Moscow start coding a replacement.
True.
Every time a tank...
True. Like I said, right, in the past, the US sanctions were effective, but we're living in a digital world today. I mean, if you have followed the Epstein case, or you are still following it, you will learn about cryptocurrency. That apparently some of the funds to do with Epstein, the money was transferred through those crypto. So meaning the money couldn't be traced. You understand that the world is evolving, right? The world is evolving. There are now different ways to transact or to transfer or to receive money. So this is one thing that Washington or the US maybe didn't quite pay attention to, that with time we have developments, things change. If you impose sanctions on people, they will find alternatives ways. That is a human nature. Survival instincts. It always kicks in if you are suppressed.
Is seized, someone invests in a shadow fleet. The data tells the story. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen to 56.77%. Still dominant, but the trajectory is someone invests in a shadow fleet. The data tells the story. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen to 56.77%. Still dominant, but the trajectory is clear. A decade ago, it was above 64. Central banks are diversifying, and they're not being subtle about it.
True.
China
It's happening.
itself has been methodically reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. In February 2026, Beijing held approximately $693 billion in treasuries. The peak was $1.317 trillion in 2013. That's a reduction of nearly half. China
Wow.
is not dumping treasuries on the open market. That would be self-destructive. It's simply not rolling them over. Quiet, steady, strategic. And then there's gold. In a world where your dollar reserves can be frozen by executive order, gold is the only truly sovereign asset. It sits in your vault. No one can sanction it. No one can freeze it. In the first quarter of 2026, central banks purchased a record 244 tons of gold. Poland, Uzbekistan, China. The price hit $5,600 an ounce in January, a number that would have seemed absurd 5 years ago. But the most important development isn't about what countries are moving away from. It's about what they're moving toward.
Exactly.
Project M-Bridge, a cross-border payment platform built on central bank digital currencies, now connects China, Thailand, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. By 2026, transaction volume on the platform reached $55 billion, with 95% of payments conducted in digital yuan. These are
Wow.
instant settlements. No correspondent banks, no SWIFT messages, no American choke points. A Chinese manufacturer paying a Saudi oil producer settles the transaction in seconds in digital yuan on a system that Washington cannot see, cannot intercept, and cannot shut down. Then there's BRICS Pay, slated for launch at the 2026 summit in India.
Wait, BRICS Pay? Let's hear. Oh, okay.
Unified payment system linking the domestic payment networks of BRICS member states, which now include Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE. Combined, these nations represent roughly half the world's population and a growing share of global GDP. The goal? Enable trade in national currencies without ever touching the dollar. Not as an experiment.
Do you see where this is going? Why? Because the US decided to abuse its power. I feel like sometimes as people, right? As people, sometimes some people they might say, oh, maybe there are people out there who are looking to see the US or the economy collapse. That is not a solution. That is not a solution. You can never wish for a country's economy to collapse. Do you know why? Because when the economy collapses, right, people migrate. And where do they migrate to? They migrate to other countries. That's why we have mass migration. Thank you, Lincoln Smith. That's why we have like a lot of problems of mass migration, cultural conflicts, and so forth. The problem is not the finance itself. The financial system that that the US has built over a decade, it's quite a very, very effective system. It's quite effective. And it has made transactions domestically and globally effective and seamless. Thank you very much. You too. It has made global transactions seamless. It has made global transaction effective, right? But what happened is that over a decade, these people decided to abuse that power. Understand? The system itself is quite an effective system. Had there not been unreasonable sanctions to countries like Cuba, Iran, um, maybe Zimbabwe, and many other countries. Russia, it is debatable because, to be honest, I'm not even well informed with the Ukraine and the Russian war. I will try to do my research. If I have research there, I will talk about it. But you see that there are many countries that the US and the European countries have sanctioned unreasonably so. So basically, it's like these people, they understood that they have global power. They have systems that African people don't have, or China or Asian people don't have. But now things are turning around, right? Now things are turning around. Now we have competing countries that are building slowly but surely, are building systems that will not rely on dollar, will not rely on the European frameworks. Because we can even let's give an example with UN. I can talk about UN, for example. UN, right? Like, let's be honest, right? The UN, the war in Gaza has been going on for a decade. They say since from 1948, if I'm not mistaken. For a decade. For a decade. We have, I've seen like a Bella Hadid, the model father, try to recount how they were somehow moved from their own homes. You can imagine. I'll talk about it someday, but I just want to give you an example right now of like how the global superpowers are collapsing and why. We have the UN, right? What has the UN done with the Gaza war? Honestly, I'm saying since from 1948, this is 2026. What have they done? Nothing. Literally nothing. And that goes to show you that these international treaties, laws, they are biased sometimes. They not even sometimes, most of the time, they are biased. These international instruments were put there. Yes, yes, yes. Honestly, the world is turning around. I agree. Like these international instruments, they were put there to protect the vulnerable, to avoid chaos, to avoid conflicts, to avoid the killing of people, the starving of people, starvation. But what has the UN done? Since from 1948, what has the UN done? Nothing. This goes to show you that Europe is not as powerful as we all thought it was. They cannot stop a small country like Israel. They can't. I just saw the news just 2 days ago, an interview of Netanyahu. Do you know what Netanyahu said? He said, we have occupied 60% of Gaza now. Exactly. You don't abuse power. That's what the US has done and has been doing for a decade. They've abused power. And I will just say, I do commend the systems that they have built, but somehow along the way, they got it wrong. Another thing, the US is quite it's a big country with humongous economy, with like the influence of US, it can never be underestimated. They have influence in the world. They still do. Even though it is declining, they still do. Right? They still do. But can you imagine a country like the US? This is what I'm trying to show you how these financial systems, how these international frameworks, they get manipulated sometimes. Because how can a big nation like the US bow to Israel? For me, it is something that I do not understand. How can they support the genocide in Gaza? It's not like those people, they don't, but then they know. But do you know why they do so? Yes, yes, yes. They know, but like they have power. But like you ask yourself a simple question: why do they bow to Israel? Let me tell you something. Had the US a long time ago, not even today, even today actually, Even today, they can make that decision. Had the US government a long time ago, even today, decided to cut ties with Israel now, they would have saved millions. Even now, they can still save millions of displaced Iranians, literally. But they're not doing it. Do you know why? Because they control the financial system in the world. They do. I don't know who controls it now. At this point, I'm thinking like, is the Israelis who are controlling these Washington financial systems? Because for me, it just doesn't make sense. Why would like a democratic country like the US? It is a democratic country. It is a country that really realizes the rights of people. It does. It does. They do. They do. They have the power to stop Israel, but then nope. But instead, they choose to support Israel. Doesn't make sense, right? Doesn't. But I hope, I don't know, let's just hope someday soon we don't have war in this world. People live peacefully together, honestly. Because it's sad to see what's happening in Gaza. I just saw a marathon last month. It's like the Palestinian marathon. You see people running, they're amputated. It's painful, you know. It's painful. It's painful. You see young people, children, they don't have arms, they don't have legs. That is traumatizing. I was heartbroken when I saw that. When I'm like, how can people be so like evil? How can the US allow this to happen? It doesn't suit the US, honestly. They could have done
as
better.
infrastructure. For countries like Russia and Iran, these aren't experiments, they're lifelines. But for China, this is about something bigger. It's about building the infrastructure for a world where Washington's financial leverage is regional, not global.
Thank
I've
you,
studied enough
Lincoln.
history to know that this pattern isn't new. Every dominant system generates its own opposition. The British pound sterling was the world's reserve currency for over a century. Its decline didn't happen because of a war or a single crisis. It happened because the system it anchored became too expensive for too many players. Countries found alternatives, not because they hated Britain, but because it was in their interest. Consider what happened to the pound between 1914 and 1945. Britain used its financial power to fund 2 world wars, imposing capital controls, freezing foreign deposits, and leveraging its position as a creditor nation. By the time the dust settled, the very allies it had bankrolled, particularly the United States, had built parallel financial...
That's a very good... What? I wonder what brought the world to this situation. That is a very good question there. I do wonder sometimes, honestly. I do wonder, like, how did we get here? And another thing that I feel like we sometimes overlook or we don't pay attention to when it comes to war is that it's like creating generational hatred. Because when you think about it right now, do you think, right? Do you think the Palestinians, do you think they will someday just wake up and be like, you know what? We forgive the Israelis. Do you think they will do that? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's going to be catastrophic in the future coming generation. Some people will forgive and move on if they, maybe, we don't know. Some people may forgive and move on. But some people would be angry, justifiably so, but I wouldn't support violence in anyhow. But there will be Palestinians who will be angry in the coming generations or centuries, we don't know when, who will be very angry when they get taught about their history. And the worst part is that they are living in whatever that, like they are living in the genocide. country. They see it. It's happening. You see those rumbles there. They live in under or within those rumbles. And do we expect those people to grow up someday? Those children to grow up to be like, you know what? It's okay. Let's move on. No, it is just going to. This thing has already created generational hatred, and that's just how things tend to work in life, or tend to be like this in life. Like, I wonder what brought the world to this situation. Generational hatred. You inflict pain on people. Those who comes after them, they want revenge. Yeah, the love of money also. Whoever created money probably was the person who caused a lot of trouble in the world. Maybe the world was better before there was money. Maybe when people used to trade with what they had. Money, because it's like it is can be centralized. It's like goes to one person, and people can be like billionaires. Can you imagine? Why would someone want to be a billionaire? I don't. This is a logic that I don't get it. Why would a one person wants to be a billionaire? For me, it doesn't make sense. You're gonna die someday, and then what's gonna happen to your billions? I would rather just work hard, make money, and enjoy existing instead of taking all the money in the world and then you put it to yourself. Like, what is the point? For me, I feel like there is no point for being a billionaire. There isn't. There isn't. Billions. I would understand millions. If we say millions because maybe you want to live in a lavish house, nice, you know, fine, drive fancy cars, fine. But there's no car that can, like, even the most expensive car in the world does not justify why a person should be a billionaire or even a trillionaire, because now it's like there's another race of these billionaires. They want to be trillionaires already. It's insane. It's crazy.
Infrastructure
It's a crazy
that
world.
rendered the pound redundant. Britain didn't lose the pound's status in a boardroom vote. It lost it because the world it had built outgrew the system it controlled.
It's the same thing
The
that was
same
happening to
logic
the US.
applies here.
Mm.
China
True.
doesn't need to destroy the dollar system. It just needs to build a viable alternative. And the harder the US pushes sanctions, the faster that alternative gets built. Sanctions, in this sense, are self-defeating. Not immediately, not dramatically, but structurally, over time, they erode the very foundation they depend on. There is a deep irony in this. The United States has the most powerful financial weapon in history.
True.
And every
agree.
time it fires that weapon, it
I
teaches
agree.
the rest of the world how to build a bunker.
That is true. I agree. I did say this. I'm like, I'm not going to like underestimate the financial system that the US has built over a decade. But the biggest mistake they made was to use it as a weapon against countries they don't like, because there is no valid reason why the US would invade Iran or Iraq or other countries they've invaded in the past. You know, there is no valid reason for that. Even them dropping a bomb in Hiroshima, there is no valid reason for that. There is just no valid reason for even colonialism. Why people want to colonize other people? Like, these things, they just don't have like valid reasons.
Let me bring this home because everything I've described, the legal orders, the shadow
Yeah, but my sister, God have plans for His creation. I do believe that.
fleets, the crumbling architecture, it all ends up in the same place, your cost of living. On May 3rd, 2026, the average price of regular gasoline in the United States is $4.44 per gallon. That's roughly 40%.
For me, I don't understand, right? No, the US just played itself. It's painful to watch, because I'm talking about a population of 350 million people, right? It's this is something that politicians, I feel like they tend to ignore, that when you start this illegal wars or a war in general, can they agree that God has planned for his creation? You know, let me tell you, it depends who you're asking that question. If you ask Israelis, they will tell you that I've seen a video of an Israel minister who said that Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, was a prostitute. So it depends who you're asking this question. So we have non-believers and we have believers and we have the neutral people in the middle who they respect the both sides. It's like they don't believe in it, but they don't disrespect it, which is something that I appreciate about many people. It's like it's okay, you don't have to believe in God or believe in Jesus Christ, but you can respect people's religion, it's free. It's not like you have to pay money to respect people's religion. But can they agree that God has plans for his creation? If you ask the Israelis, they will tell you that uh, God doesn't, or Jesus Christ, or God don't, doesn't exist or whatever. If you ask me, I do believe, I do believe wholeheartedly that, um, something in the world starts somewhere, right? It does. Um, the world started somewhere and it's gonna end somewhere. We don't know where it's gonna end, but everything happens for a reason. Some reasons are we need to be careful. We say everything happens for a reason, but not all reasons are reasonable, right? For example, killing people is not reasonable, right? Raping people is not reasonable. But let's say, yeah, yeah, I do believe in that most of these things will come to pass. They will, they will, they will, they will come to pass. Let's just hope that, you know what? Let's just hope the world gets better in the future. Let's finish this video.
Higher than a year ago. In California, it's $6.10. In Washington State, $5.66. Diesel, which is the fuel that moves every product you buy, is at $5.64 nationwide, up 58%. This
What question? But why are these things happening? You know, one thing about nature, right? One thing I can say, you're asking me, like, why do we have war? Why do we have, like, poor people? Why do we have all these bad things happening in the world? Um, Nature is quite vague, to put it that way. Nature is quite vague, very vague. When you pay attention to nature, you don't look at nature in a perspective of religion or in a perspective of science. Just look at nature as it is, right? You just look at it and be like, nature is vague. Nobody knows, really. We can just maybe argue that bad things happen because of someone's background, which can be justified, right? Greed could be justified. Mental illnesses could be justified. There are many factors, to take into consideration. But what I can say is, like, you can just it's not about people. When you think about nature, think about natural disasters. Those things are natural disasters. Why are they natural disasters? It's like, it's not just like people are hating other people. We have, like, water, the rain causing floods and killing people. We have earthquake killing people. It's like, it's just nature. Yeah, it is just nature. Yeah, yeah, yeah. People don't want that. People, they don't want to think about where they come from. Um, nature is quite vague. I can tell you that. It is quite vague. It's we could maybe assume that in the beginning maybe there was peace, but there is this there is something that I learned, which is religious. I don't know if it's Christian or which religion it belongs to, but they say human God gave people volition, right? Volition, like free will, freedom, right? And I think maybe that's where the problem began, because when you give people too much freedom, they cause chaos. They do cause chaos. Maybe people should have been designed to have the same mindset, but volition is the problem. The free will, the ability to think independently on your own. That is something that makes me wonder about nature. Like, why did nature create people in that manner? Because the problems that are happening is because of our mind, the way we think differently. Like, any person has a right to think however they think. I will try. I will try. Hopefully, maybe I will try to make a religious video someday, because it will be quite good video, especially considering what's happening in the Middle East with Israel. And because another thing that I learned recently is that we have different, not different Jews, but we have Jews and imposters, people who impose as Jews but they're not Jews. And some people argue that those people are the Israelis. They say the Israelis are not the Jewish people, they're the Zionists. So that's a debate for another day. I will make a video on that one, and we will talk about um, maybe the Christianity, Islam, maybe Buddhism, African religions before, because African religion, if you ask me, I will say spiritual, like Sangoma. I'll say Sangoma, but we don't have like religious books as African people, like Europeans, Asians, Arabs, and the people in the Middle East, like the Islam people. They have like their religion is written in the book, but the religion of African people is not in writing. It's they say spiritual. We don't know. I don't know. We can talk about this some other day. Let's finish the collapse of the US power.
Isn't just about oil prices. It's about the cascade. When diesel costs more, trucking costs more. When trucking costs more, everything in the truck costs more. Food, medicine, building materials, the clothes on your back. But it goes deeper than fuel. The collapse of the unified maritime insurance system has made
You're
shipping
welcome,
itself
Lincoln.
unpredictable. War risk
You're
premiums
welcome.
for vessels transiting the
Thank
Strait
you
of
very much
Hormuz
also for
have
sharing your
increased
opinion.
12-fold since early 2025. The world's largest container lines, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, are rerouting ships around the Cape of Good Hope.
Okay, so I need to go somewhere, right? In conclusion, right, I will conclude this video by saying this about the collapse of the US, right? The US dominance or the US power. Why? So based on my perspective, right, is that the US power, it is decreasing because, or declining because of their abuse of that power. Had they not just started this habit of sanctioning countries unreasonably so, they wouldn't have driven China, their biggest ally, into creating a system. We wouldn't be having BRICS today. Today we have BRICS. Ah, you're from Ghana. Hello, Ghana. Oh, how is Ghana? When I go back home, I need to visit Ghana, really. I really need to visit Ghana. I do. I really do. I need to really visit African countries as an African person. I don't know why, right? I feel like, to be honest, right, I can speak as a South African, and I'm not trying to say, oh, maybe South African don't like African. for me to be in an Asian country, it was not because, oh, I am traveling, I'm exploring the world. It was because of work. That's how I ended up here. So I don't know if traveling is common amongst South Africans, but I've seen in the past years there used to be like this group travel to, especially Mozambique. Mozambique used to South Africans used to like travel to Mozambique. They still do even today. Like they have like this group travels to Mozambique, but I've never traveled to African countries. The first time I left South Africa was for South Korea. From South Korea, I went to Malaysia. From Malaysia, and then I came to Thailand. But when I go back home, it would be nice to visit because now I think I like the idea of traveling. In the past, I didn't. I just wanted to be someone who traveled for work or to learn. I went to South Korea because I wanted to learn about business. They I like their business mindset. I went there to learn about the business. For example, if I go to China or Singapore, I want to learn about fintech because I am doing my PhD this year, and my PhD it is specializes in fintech. So you see, it's like for me, if I go to another country, I need to have a valid reason. But now that I enjoy being outside of my country, when I travel, when I go back to South Africa, I will definitely visit the north. Ghana, I'm very curious about Ghana. Nigeria also, I would like to visit Nigeria. You know, I will tell you my story when I with Nigeria next time. Next time. I used to love Nigeria when I was very young. But life, I don't know, things happened. We will talk about this someday. So thank you very much, Lincoln. May God bless the north also, the north of Africa, the south of Africa, our people, you know, eradicate the poverty in our people, help our people live comfortable lives also. I think that is good. Bye.